Welcome into the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM. Brendan Glasheen in the host chair, joined today by Sean Zerillo and Billy Ward here on August 16th. That means we're here for some best bets around the UFC card. Yes, we're heading out to Perth, Australia for UFC 305. It's at the RAC Arena, main event, and the main card over on pay-per-view. So we look forward to this. Only a couple more of these to go on the podcast side because we make the full transition to NFL. So it's our second to last week covering UFC extensively on Fridays here on the Action Network podcast. So let's dive on in. We've got ourselves a middleweight title fight, Sean, that's going to, I think, captivate some folks. You got Israel Adesanya and Dricus Du Plessis. They've been mouthing off to each other. There's some personal back and forth between these two, so that's compelling. What do you make of the actual fight itself and how you would like to approach betting it?
Pick'em fight, and I think it deserves to be a pick'em fight because the longer I break this one down, the more confusing I feel like I'm getting is with regards to which side I want to pick. I don't fence it with regards to my main event takes. I feel like usually have pretty confident main event takes, and I feel like my ROI on main events is pretty high. This one, I'm really torn on. Like, I want to be very clear. If this was not a main event, if I did not have to give out a pick on this fight, if I was not writing an individual fight preview for this one, I'm sitting back and watching it because this is really tough to pick. I think the determining factor for who wins is how many rounds Dricus Du Plessis gets takedowns in and how long he keeps those positions. Because I do think he needs to grapple to win this fight. I think he can be competitive in the kickboxing, but I don't think he's going to have as much success as he had against his other recent opponents. Izzy is 3 inches taller. He's 4 inches longer. He's a great counter striker, and he's got the longer legs. He's going to be able to kick Dricus a ton. Izzy's recent opponents, too, were all really good at checking leg kicks. Jan Blachowicz, Sean Strickland, Alex Pereira. Pereira also kicked him a ton, which slowed him down. DDP is going to absorb all those leg kicks. And I think when they're standing at range, Izzy's going to have a lot more success in the striking exchanges than DDP's other recent opponents had, and as Izzy had against his recent opponents. So I think the striking advantage is pretty clear for Adesanya here. He's just so much longer. He's quicker, much more technical. Dricus needs to crowd him. He needs to get in his face. He needs to force a lot of grappling, whether it's wrestling and getting the fight to the ground or tying him up, putting him up against the fence, clinching him, landing strikes from the clinch, and just making this whole fight greasier, dirty, and slowed down. But as I said, I think it ultimately determines on how many takedowns does he get, how many rounds does he get those takedowns in, and how long does he spend on top after getting takedowns. Because to me, Dricus is just sort of a bigger, more muscular version and a better athlete, but similar fighting style-wise to Marvin Vettori, who Izzy's beaten twice, beaten pretty comfortably, was able to deny those takedowns, was able to scramble up one getting taken down, and eventually separated and won clear striking exchanges. I think this one plays out pretty similarly on the feet, but also I think DDP is capable of actually getting him down and holding top positions. So based on the fact that I think he needs top time to win, I'm interested in Du Plessis by submission. I think that's a good number, considering if he wins, he's probably getting extensive grappling time and likely close to finishing the fight at some point. However, in terms of how I project it out, I show value on his decision prop. I show value on Izzy by KO. That is where my projections point to there being value. That said, I found it very interesting. This fight is essentially 45% to go to a decision, plus 115. The fight is a pick'em. The fight is 45% to go to a decision, so pretty close to 50-50 to go to a decision. Yet Izzy is like minus 250 to win by decision. Dricus is about plus 600. So the betting market strongly favors Dricus to win by finish if there is a finish. The betting market strongly favors Izzy to win by decision if it goes to decision. Yet if you look at how I projected this out, the value is technically on Izzy to win by finish and Dricus to win by decision. So again, just want to reiterate, really confusing the more I looked at this one, but I do think the determining factor is how quickly do the takedowns come? How easily do they come? And how long is Dricus able to stay on top? And for that reason, I think it's a true pick'em. I'd be happy to take plus 100, plus one, probably plus 110 on either side. It opened closer to plus 140 for Dricus. It's now moved closer to a pick'em. So I'm going to wait until closer to fight time to see if I can get one of these guys at plus 110. And then I'm also, as I said, interested maybe in Dricus by decision or Izzy by KO. I do think Dricus could top time him, maybe get a submission, but likelier just get the top time, win the rounds. But I think Izzy's going to have chances to counter a guy who's going to be rushing in at him, similar to how Paulo Costa fought him, or similar to how Robert Whittaker fought him, where they have to find ways to navigate that distance, close that 4-inch reach advantage, and they're going to have to blitz in and try to land strikes, or DDP's going to have to blitz in and try to land strikes like those guys did, and I think he's going to get caught in a counter. Harris, same thing, got caught in a counter and knocked out cold. So, yeah, Izzy's counters are underrated. It's probably the best skill of his overall game aside from the leg kicks, and I think he's going to have opportunities to close the show. So, yeah, even though the market suggests DDP is the likelier finisher, I think it may be the opposite.
Yeah, you're going back and forth. I think if you're confused, we're all screwed.
It's a tough fight to break down. It's a very good fight. The best fights are often the toughest to break down because people in their minds think they should be coin flips, and certainly the betting market has gone that way. So tough fight to break down. But, again, I'd be happy to take plus 110 either side. I think it's a true coin flip. But if I'm betting props, Du Plessis decision, Izzy KO, I think is the way to go.
It could have had slight plus money earlier in the week on Plessis. But see, Sean, that's why we have the podcast, because you can flush it all out. And then you can also throw it at Billy, and you can get Billy's thoughts. Where do you land, Billy Ward, on this main event?
The thing that Sean said that I most strongly agree with is that if this weren't the main event, I would almost certainly not be betting it. I felt that in my soul as he said that. And it's just, first of all, it's, we talk about with other sports, like efficient markets versus inefficient markets. This is a fight that's been announced for a long time. There's a lot of attention on it. We can pretty reasonably assume that the market is mostly going to be correct on a fight like this because it is drawing a lot of attention. Until Drake comes in and bets $500,000 on someone, it's mostly sharp action, betting early and pushing this where it should be.
I should say I'll wait to bet the other side that Drake bets, right? That's the actual move.
That's the tradition of this podcast for the big fights.
I mean, we know what side Drake's betting, right? He's betting on Adesanya. That's pretty clear. You can get some CLV on that one, just beating Drake to the books. With that said, since I have to bet it for the sake of content and all those things, I think I'm going to take Adesanya. And where I landed on that is if we ignore the Sean Strickland loss for Israel Adesanya, if we just strike that from our memories, Izzy's like a minus 300 favorite here, right? His striking is so much cleaner. Basically, nobody at middleweight has ever been able to take him down or do anything with it. He's more accurate, longer, all the things we look for. We just have that Strickland loss where it's like, oh, there is a game plan to beat him by getting in his face and all that stuff. We shouldn't ignore big data points. With that said, it seems pretty likely that Adesanya wasn't really training for that fight, didn't really care, just kind of thought he was going to style on Strickland and just be so much better that it didn't matter. The evidence I have for that is that it came out after that he got pulled over for DUI 10 days before that fight, which doesn't strike me as a guy who was working really hard and living the right way in training camp. Assuming he's back to full motivation for this one, this is a guy who knocked out Alex Pereira. We think Alex Pereira might be the best pound-for-pound fighter, might be a 3-division champ pretty soon. And Adesanya slept him. He was beating Pereira for 4 rounds when he lost to him, too. He was up 3-1 or 4-0, depending on which scorecards you looked at. So you factor all that in. At 35, he's not super old for a middleweight. I think Adesanya is the correct side here at the current lines. I love Sean's angle about trying to wait on plus money. That would obviously be much more comfortable. But I'm going to plant my flag on Adesanya. Not a huge bet for me. Don't go, this is not some 5-unit will play of the week or anything like that. But if I have to, which I kind of do, I'm taking Adesanya on the money line. I get Sean's angle, too, where the books have overreacted to who's going to win a decision, who's going to win knockout. I originally looked at, maybe Izzy decision only. He's less likely to hunt for knockout, stuff like that. But books have figured that out and have probably gone too far in that direction.
Billy, one other angle I was thinking about, because a lot of my difficulty judging this fight is not knowing how the grappling exchanges look. If Dricus comes out and immediately lands a takedown, right, and wins round 1 with a takedown, but then round 2, he decides to strike it out and he doesn't go for the takedown again, but you're like, oh, I know he has that in his back pocket. Is Dricus not the live play if it goes back to a pick'em price after round 2 and he only grappled once?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point, and I've talked about it with various other fight breakdowns that, like, I might be a better striker than you, but if I'm worried that you're going to take me down, you've shown me that you can take me down, and you're keeping those level changes in my face, you're going to look like a better striker. We talked about with G-Rod and CLD. There's somebody a couple weeks ago. So, yeah, that's a very good point. It's going to be interesting to see what the live lines are like, if there's public money kind of skewing those in a weird way. I bet we're going to have some rounds that no one feels really confident who won, which also makes it a live betting opportunity. You know, if we have a couple of those rounds and one guy goes to plus 200, I think you don't even worry about anything else. You just say, we don't know what the judges are thinking here. But yeah, that's a good point too.
Is there a chance?
That's just my biggest like question mark going into the fight is, does he get him? Like how easy does the takedown look? And I almost want to see one before I determine which side to bet on. Because if Izzy denies it, I might be firing on Izzy right away in the middle of round 1. You know, it's really like the first takedown, I think, is going to tell you a lot and give you a lot more information about how the whole fight plays out.
Is there a path where you could maybe get both guys on at plus money at some point? I mean, I know it's like a split second of a window you have to get that kind of edge. But
yeah, if it's a pick'em going into the fight, it's going to flip back and forth depending on you know which way the round tips. So absolutely, you know, you could. If Dricus doesn't go for a takedown, say Dricus just decides to strike it out for a round, and he's like, "Hey, let's see how this goes. I know I have the grappling in my back pocket, but let's see if I can compete in the striking." And he never grapples in round 1 and probably loses the round, and then he's plus 200. Yeah, that's the spot where you bet Dricus, because you're like, okay, he didn't even pursue his best path to victory yet, and now the price blew out, and he still has 4 rounds to work with. You know, he didn't really lose anything trying to strike it out for a round. Yes, like he still needs to win 3 of the final 4 rounds, but if the takedowns were going to come, they're still going to come. So, you know, I actually like, I think that might be the best live spot is Dricus doesn't grapple for a round. He blows out a little bit to plus 250, but then you know he's probably going to try to grapple and you're getting a much better number on it at that point. So that might be the spot where I'd look to try to truly jump in on Dricus. But yeah, I mean, with it being a pick'em fight, Brendan, there's a good chance you can get plus money in the live market on both sides at different times. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And considering, as I said, I'd be happy to take either guy at plus money. And I think there will be momentum swings back and forth through the fight. Very difficult rounds to judge in this fight. I don't think that's a bad strategy at all.
All right, there you go. We just picked apart the main event in 10 minutes. So hope that's enough to not confuse you and you have a little more clarity. Looking forward to that.
You know less than you do 10 minutes ago if you just listen to that breakdown.
But you guys kind of layered it out where there's the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, it's a good fight and it's very competitive, and I think the line is accurate. So it's tough to like really plant a flag here.
All right, flyweight bout. It's a fight of the night for Sean and Billy. Kai Kara France and Steve Erceg. The price on Erceg has, on Kara France has come down a little bit, right around plus 140 from earlier in the week. Could have had plus 150, plus 155. Sean, same kind of deal here. I don't know if it's as compelling as the one we just talked about, but what do you make of it, and how would you like to go about betting it?
Yeah, not quite as violent of a fight, maybe, but still a very interesting fight between these flyweights. A battle of Oceania between New Zealand and Australia, which is always going to be fun. So the home crowd will be polling for Erceg, the Australian, and he was basically one fight IQ mistake away from being the flyweight champion currently. He was tied 2-2 with Alexander Pantoja, and instead of separating and trying to strike in round 5, where he was winning the fight, he decided to grapple and basically got controlled and lost a very narrow decision. Now, he's fighting a guy who's a completely different fighter in Kai Kara France, who's a kickboxer. Kai is shorter, but he does have the reach advantage in the boxing, and he's, I think, a bit quicker. I think he has quicker hands. But Erceg is younger. Not much younger, but younger. And I think the trajectory of his career, I think he's the likelier of the two to get back into title contention moving forward, because he's the much more well-rounded fighter, and I think he has all of the grappling upside in this fight, which justifies his favoritism. He was out-grappled, or at least offensively out-grappled by Pantoja, but he showed phenomenal defensive grappling. And in other fights, he showed that he can get on top of guys and use his size and his strength to hold them down. I think his offensive grappling is super underrated. And I also think he's the better boxer in this matchup. The one advantage I'd give Kara-France is the kicks. I mean, the speed too, like the hand speed. But overall, I think Erceg hits harder, and I think he has more volume. He's better technically in terms of the overall game. You know, not just the striking, but his overall offensive grappling, I think, is where he wins this fight. So I'm actually interested in Erceg by submission. I think if he's going to cover his money line, he's likely offensive grappling. And I think if he's offensive grappling, he's likely putting Kara-France in dangerous positions at some point. Kai tends to give his back in every single fight. Every time he stands up, he gives his back. So I think a rear naked choke is always in play. You know, he's fought those off in the past. Rogerio Bontorin really had his back for a while, and Kai eventually shook him off and knocked him out. But he's getting older. And as you get older in the flyweight division, that speed tends to decline just a touch, and fractional differences in speed make all the difference in the world. So yeah, Steve Erceg minus 170 would probably bet him up to about minus 180. And then I'm taking a look at his submission prop as well.
Okay, you guys are on the opposite sides here. Billy's going to go to the other side on France, Kai-France.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a strong take for me at the current line. This is one I jumped on early in the week in my luck ratings. I got Kara-France at plus 164. I think the best you can get now is plus 150. I still like that. I feel like that plus 150 at BetMGM is generous on the Kara-France side. But with that said, like, I'm obviously anchored to my pick early in the week a bit. The thing that I like on the Kara-France side is it's a relatively quick turnaround for Erceg. 3 months. I mean, it's not horrible, but it's a quick-ish turnaround against a completely different fighter with the exact opposite game plan as who he just fought. Plus, you get sometimes, I think there's a little bit of an emotional or motivational letdown when you lose a title fight. You know, it's a big emotional thing, and then it didn't go the way you wanted it to. Now you're thrown back in there against another young guy. The other thing, though, and this is really where the luck ratings came from, is pretty much every media member, fan vote, whatever, said Kara-France won his fight against Amir Albazi. And had he won the fight, it would have been Kara-France getting the title fight instead of Steve Erceg. I think we look at these guys a little bit different if it was Kara-France who lost a close decision in a title fight and Steve Erceg is the one on the way up trying to get there. You know, Kara-France is the veteran here. He's been in the UFC a long time, more wins. So plus 150, I do like his speed and athleticism advantages. I think that'll still be there. I thought they were farther apart in age as well, because Kara-France has been in the UFC for what feels like 10 years, but he's like 18 months older or something. So I don't really worry about that angle. It's not enough to factor into my handicapping at all. So plus 150 on Kara-France, kind of like it. If you want to get, you know, spicy with it, Kara-France by knockout or Kara-France by finish, I don't think he's a great round winner typically. He needs those big moments to win rounds. Those tend to turn into knockouts some of the time. So that's another angle. I don't love that because he could win the round just with damage, even if he doesn't get a finish, but consider those as well.
I should mention, too, I'm continuing to wait on the price movement for Erceg. He opened closer to minus 240. As Billy Brennan mentioned, you know, Kara-France was closer to plus 170, plus 180 at peak. So this line continues to move in, and Erceg continues to become a shorter favorite. So I would hope, you know, I can get him closer to minus 160, minus 150 even before I fire. But yeah, not firing right away. I think, if anything, this will continue to push a little bit closer to a pick-em price. So waiting for best number on Erceg.
Well, and if you're betting Kara-France, you should be firing right away, and ideally like 3 days ago. So, you know, if you got on early enough, this might even be an arbitrage opportunity, which, I don't know, I might take. We'll see. I kind of like having something to root for on these fights, but if it gets big enough, I'll probably just arb it out if we get enough movement.
Should be a good pop in the building in Australia for Erceg, so that should be fun to see how that one unfolds. How about underdogs for UFC 305? What do we think of the card this week for dogs, Sean?
There's a few I like, and Billy and I will get to kind of a prop way to play a consensus underdog later that we think is undervalued. But the two underdogs on the money line that I like straight up, the first, the Leech, Li Jinglang, plus 295. He hasn't fought since September 2022. That was the fight or the card where he was rebooked at the last minute and forced to fight Daniel Rodriguez at a 10-pound weight disadvantage and lost a split decision that he should have won. He got absolutely robbed fighting a guy who was 10 pounds heavier than him. And he's been out for 2 years because he's been dealing with spinal surgery and recovery from that spinal surgery. My hot take is that he may come back better after that spinal surgery, because apparently he was dealing with a lot of quiet numbness and interruptions to his training previously. He had a strength disparity in one of his arms due to the neck injury. Apparently that's all healed up now. And he took the extra time off to make sure that he was fully recovered. I think there's a chance he's better, or at least feels better than he did previously. The problem is the rust and, the inactivity. But he's fighting Carlos Prates, who is a low-volume striker who's typically losing minutes. Prates is extremely hittable. He only defends strikes at 39% thus far in the UFC. He's also fought and knocked out 3 very chinny opponents, including Trevin Giles, who was winning the first round against him. And Trevin Giles typically wins round 1 and then falls off of a cliff and gets knocked out. So nothing about Prates' career has played out unexpectedly. He's been given gifted matchups. He's been able to finish those matchups. Li Jingliang is an extremely durable striker. The way you beat Li Jingliang is out-grappling him. Khamzat Chimaev took him down immediately, choked him out. If you have a grappling advantage, you can destroy Li Jingliang. But aside from that, is he the second best Chinese mixed martial artist ever besides Wang Li? I mean, he's phenomenally talented. Great boxer. Really good volume. This is also in his part of the world. Prates is the one traveling further and on a strange body clock, and he's also a chain smoker. I think that's partially why Prates doesn't throw a ton of volume. He smokes a lot of cigarettes. I don't think he has great stamina. But yeah, I think given the stylistic matchup, the fact that Prates probably isn't going to try to grapple him, Li is very durable. Prates has also been knocked out. I think Li may be the more durable fighter of the two. Prates has been knocked out regionally. So, I'd love to take some Leach KO. I'd love to take some Leach decision, but I think you just have to play his money line at 3-1. If he's fine from the neck surgery, the spinal surgery, if that is not negatively impacting him, this line is way off. I think so much of that line is driven by this guy's coming off of a long layoff after having spinal surgery. We don't know what he looks like. I think there's a chance he looks better. So the reach, 7-inch reach discrepancy, tough to navigate. Prates is a very dangerous guy, but he does not defend strikes. He's super hittable. He's low volume. I think he needs to finish this fight to cover his price tag, and Leach is a very durable guy. The other fight, Walter Walker, we're not going to get weigh-ins for these matchups until about 6 p.m. Eastern time, so typically fighters are weighing in on or around when we're talking about these fights on the Action Network podcast. Not going to weigh until way after the fact today. By all accounts on his Instagram, Walter Walker is taking advantage of the post-USADA era of the UFC. He looked a bit doughy in his UFC debut at heavyweight. He looks absolutely ripped for this fight. My concern is that he has a grappling upside, and it seems kind of evident that the UFC is going to wrestlers and telling them not to wrestle anymore. Not re-signing Muhammad Makayev. The Carl Williams fight last week was a little strange, and apparently it came out that Williams was told that by matchmakers that they didn't like his style and that he shouldn't wrestle anymore. I mean, good cash on Denise, Billy, but I'm sure you noticed Williams was not following his optimal game plan there. So I get a little sketched out betting guys who have the grappling upside, maybe because they may not grapple anymore. But Walter Walker, I think, still young, looks very muscular, and Junior Tava, whenever he gets stuck on his back, is completely lost. He can get stuck. One takedown is the round when you're fighting Junior Tava. So if Walker does grapple, I think plus money, the clear side of that matchup. But curious that, if you're interested in either of those dogs, Billy. I don't know. I was against Walker in his UFC debut, so I'm trying to come back on him here at plus money after the adjustment. But Leach really, at 3-1 really stood out to me.
Yeah, you sold me on Leach. I hadn't looked or thought about that fight at all, so I was glad to get someone's opinion on that. I'm definitely going to run out, hit that one. I think the way I would play Walker Tafa is, if you're on the Walker side, the fight to go to a decision is a better price than Walter Walker. We're assuming that for Walter Walker to win, he needs to get a takedown at some point. He doesn't strike me as a guy who's going to get a takedown and just start throwing elbows and rolling for arm bars and stuff. So there's some correlation there between him winning and the fight going to a decision. Mm-hmm. And then obviously the extreme version of that is Walker by decision at even bigger plus money. So I agree with your read on it. I would get a little bit more greedy on how I try to pursue that one.
Sure.
And then the underdog I like, or one of many, and I'll go quick on this because, Sean, you're going to touch on it later too. I like Casey O'Neill at plus 128. Another luck ratings pick that I got at a much higher price earlier in the week. Kind of like you mentioned with Li Jingliang, she was out for a while with a torn ACL, came back kind of fast, lost 2 fights. I think we're kind of at the point now where I expect her to be at full strength. It's hard to call that in the moment, right? Like, we never know when that happens, but she's been off little over 8 months since her last fight. And then this is a fight we expect to go to decision more often than not. Getting underdog on that, we like that. And Luana Santos took this on like 2-ish weeks notice, flying across the world to Australia, cutting weight, not having as long of a rehydration time after cutting weight, all of those other things. I think that all favors Casey O'Neill. If her athleticism is back to where it was, where she was, she averaged over 8 significant strikes per minute so far in the UFC. If she has that kind of athleticism again, I think she will. She should be favored here. Again, wish I would have got, or, wish for anyone betting this that you took it earlier in the week because we got a better number, but I still like the plus 125 or so.
If you've ever thought about becoming an Action Pro subscriber, now is the best time to sign up. For less than $10 a month, get a year of Action Pro access across every sport, which includes player prop picks and projection edges from Sean Kerner, our director of predictive analytics at the Action Network, and his Action Analytics team, Sean Zerillo, who is here, projections for baseball, Colin Wilson and Stuckey for college football, access to premium articles from our top experts, and so much more. And Action's podcast listeners can use the promo code POD20, POD20, to get an extra $20 off. That's POD20 for $20 off a year of Action Pro. Just visit actionnetwork.com/pricing or follow the link in this episode's description to learn more. We'll take you straight there. Okay, making our way through UFC 305. We're moving on to props. As Billy teased, I think Sean's going to hit on Casey O'Neill at some point here, but you have some other looks as well.
Yeah, we'll lead off with Casey O'Neill. So as Billy mentioned, Luana Santos taking the fight on short notice, traveling across the world, fighting a hometown fighter, though Casey O'Neill, I believe, now training in Fight Ready MMA. So she had some of her in Arizona, so she had some travel of her own to do. But she is the Australian fighter. By the way, her dad owns the biggest MMA promotion in Australia. Who do you think is getting a close decision in this fight? Now, Santos also missed weight previously against Stephanie Egger, and her cardio looked awful in that fight. She nearly got finished in round 3, was slowing down dramatically. I think O'Neill has much better cardio in this fight. I think she has much higher decision equity because she's likelier to win rounds 2 and rounds 3 at a much higher clip. So I like her decision prop pre-fight at about 3-1. I like her live after round 1 much more than I like her pre-fight money line. I think Santos is going to be difficult for a round. I think this fight will be extremely competitive, if not favor Santos in round 1. But I do think O'Neill takes over down the stretch at a high clip. I also like the camp she's training with. Fight Ready, really good at giving fighters optimal game plans and helping them to execute it. So I expect, the best version of her we've seen in a while. I've never been particularly high on her. She's very hittable. And I think Santos is going to have some success early, but I do think there's at a neutral site, no travel, all that stuff. Like, I still think Casey has a cardio advantage. Now you factor in the travel. We'll see what Santos looks like on the scales because she has missed previously. So yeah, big cardio advantage. O'Neill decision and O'Neill live after round 1. Herbert Burns is plus 550 on the money line. His odds to win by round 1 submission are about 2,400. I think that is most of his money line. He typically is a guy who's dangerous for a round, gets 1 takedown on opponents, threatens 1 submission, and if that doesn't lock in, he quits. So Jack Jenkins' round 2 odds are some of the shortest I've ever seen. They're even shorter than his round 1 odds at some books. It's unplayable, unfortunately, his round 2 and round 3 odds, because the books know that is likeliest where this fight finishes. But if Burns wins this fight, forget his money line. He's likely doing it in round 1. His round 1 submission odds, in particular, at 24-1. I'll put 500ths of a unit on that to win a unit. I don't care. It's something you have to bet. It's stupid, but it's like 90% of his win condition. I do not get why there's such a discrepancy in those odds. And then lastly, one of my favorite fights on the card, Mateus Gamrot and Dan Hooker. I don't want to go too deep into this because I know Billy's going to touch on it later. But we both had the same thought with regards to Dan Hooker's point spread at plus 3.5. How does he not win a round here? Mateus Gamrot is always in close decisions. He does not land damage. In fact, I think he's the exact type of fighter who the new emphasis on damage hurts more than anybody else, because he's a chain wrestler who constantly is looking to switch and get to different positions on opponents and looking to drag them back down or mat return, but he's never landing damage in those exchanges. And oh, by the way, he's been knocked down in 5 consecutive fights. You get knocked down, you lose the round. Dan Hooker is going to be the guy hunting for damage here, whether they're on the feet, whether he's on his back. He's going to be throwing strikes up as Gamrot's controlling him. He's going to be doing whatever he can to land as many strikes as possible. The downside here is that he hasn't fought many grapplers. And the last time he did fight a grappler, he was dismantled immediately. He's typically given strikers, matchups that are going to lead to exciting fight of the night style matchups, but Gamrot's just going to try to wrestle him and chain wrestle him and not give him, any striking range whatsoever to work with. However, I still think Hooker wins one of these 3 rounds pretty consistently, just because he's actually going to be the guy throwing strikes, where Gamrot is going to be the guy wrestling and not really doing much damage. I also think Hooker is the better cardio. Gamrot, because of his style, because he does wrestle so aggressively, tends to slow down a little bit in round 3. So maybe Hooker takes that 3rd round and ends up covering the plus 3.5 on the point spread, but getting plus money on Hooker to win at least a round and not get finished, I think is definitely a way to bet this fight. And then Hooker also live after round 1, he should have a better chance of winning rounds 2 and round 3. I think when Gamrot's fresh, it's going to be a very difficult fight and very difficult for Hooker to do much. But I think rounds 2 or round 3, he should work his way back into the fight.
Billy, prop market for you, UFC 305.
Yeah, going to touch on a couple other ones real quick and then get back to the Dan Hooker talk, which is the theme of this podcast. Mm-hmm. Opening bout, Stewie Nickel inside the distance at plus 200 against Jesus Aguilar. I did the full fight breakdown of this one. I knew nothing about Stuart Nickel coming in. No fights on Fight Pass. Got to go to YouTube if you even want to see him do his work. Usually not a great sign, but I was very impressed by what he saw. He's a second-degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He won his first few career fights by submission, had a very tough decision, and then has ground and pounded everyone since. And if you click on his Q&A on UFC.com, he talks about he realized that you can't just hunt for submissions, because if you don't get it, you end up tired, you burn out, and at a high level, those submissions aren't there. He's fighting Jesus Aguilar, who loves to just latch on for low percentage submissions and hope he gets them with no real plan B. Aguilar is notable. He's the guy with the 52-inch reach that we've teased a little bit on this podcast in the past. He knocked out Shannon Ross, but then so did everybody else, which took a little bit of shine off of that one. Controversial split decision win over Mateus Mendonça. His grappling is literally just hope you shoot in on me, and I'm going to try to squeeze this guillotine and hope I get it. If you're got short, little, strong arms, that works really well against low-level pros, amateurs, whatever. Once we get to, like, purple belt jiu-jitsu and up, people know how to defend guillotines. It's not that hard for most high-level grapplers unless you're truly elite at it. I don't think he is. I think Aguilar is going to put himself on his back, looking for those guillotines, which then gives Nickel top position. He can work his newfound ground and pound. He's the way better overall submission artist, and we're getting 2-1 on him to get a finish. So love that one. The other one, we got to do it. Tai Tuivasa by knockout at plus 270. That should be his money line. It should just be the same number. He's not going to win anything else. Rosenstruik a little bit more technical, better pace, I think, even though he's patient, but he picks his spots better. If it goes to a decision, it's probably Jairzinho. Tai Tuivasa, dink him and sink him, drink a shoey, see what kind of fun song he walks out to. It's plus 270. Let's have some fun, guys. Come on. And then finally, and this goes really well with what Sean was saying, Dan Hooker by knockout, plus 800, I think even plus 900 at points. As Sean pointed out, Gamrot's been knocked down, and I think it's 4 of his last 5. Fiziev didn't knock him down, but that was because he tore his ACL before he had a chance to. Gamrot may be the best pure grappler on the men's division in MMA right now. He's multiple-time ADCC winner. He doesn't transition between striking and grappling quite as quick as everyone else. And you'll see it. A lot of his knockdowns are, you can see in his brain, he goes, okay, it's grapple time now. And he kind of drops his hands, shifts his stance a little bit, and lunges in awkwardly, and that's when he gets clipped. I can't believe he didn't die the way Beneil Dariush hit him. Like, that was one of the biggest knockdowns I've ever seen not turn into a knockout. Gamrot also struggles against taller, longer fighters because that period between, okay, I'm striking and okay, I'm grappling is extended when you also have to close the distance. I think Dan Hooker has a 5-inch reach advantage, despite them being about the same height. That was what caught him with Jalen Turner. And Gamrot, when we're going the other direction from grappling to striking, he doesn't flip that switch quite as quick as some of these elite guys. Dan Hooker is a well-rounded mixed martial artist. He's not a grappler who started doing this. He's not a kickboxer who started doing this. He's an MMA fighter. I think he's got a good shot at catching him on the break in between, transition periods like that. And he's just got to hit him once. It's kind of like, Sean and I doing our baseball stuff. All of our bets are kind of based on stuff regressing. And you would think knockdowns will eventually regress into knockouts. That chin can't be good forever. I'm just going to jump ahead of you a little bit here, Brendan. My best bet is also Dan Hooker plus 3.5 with the exact same logic. You're basically getting even money on Dan Hooker to punch him hard once because you win the round. Gamrot is not a guy who's going to pick up 10-8s with his style. So that's my best bet. Sprinkle on the prop of Hooker knockout. Fully agree with Sean's angle. And that's it for me.
Watch out for the knees, too. Dan Hooker has really nasty knees when guys try to wrestle him. He doesn't get to use them much because guys do not try to wrestle him often, but it is one of the best tools in his skill set. I think he could potentially catch Gamrot with a knee coming in as well. Gamrot has been knocked down 5 times in the UFC. It was his debut against Guram Kutadalads where he lost a close competitive split decision, and there was a knockout in that fight, which may have ultimately swung the decision against him. So yeah, knocked down 5 times, and I believe 8 UFC fights. None of them have led to a knockout. He does seem to recover pretty well. But regression, like at some point, he may get a little bit hurt from one of these knockdowns more than the others and may not get up. So I think Dan Hooker has a decent chance of cashing him. I like that knockout prop as well, Billy, on top of the plus 3.5.
All right, Sean, best bet for you. And since Billy brought up baseball, this has nothing to do with the pitcher bird song, but a different song.
Yeah, Song Kanan, another Chinese fighter on this card, another guy fighting in his time zone and his preferred part of the world, and getting, I believe, a very soft matchup in Ricky Glenn. Glenn has 27 of his 32 career fights at 145 pounds. He moved up to lightweight because he was struggling with injuries, didn't think he could cut the weight anymore. He was knocked out in the first 3 minutes of each of his past 2 lightweight bouts. Now he's moving up to 170 to face a guy who's knocked down Ian Gary. Song's first 3 knockdowns, Billy talking about the knockout regression. Song's first 3 knockdowns in the UFC led to finishes. His last 2 have not. He knocked down Bedoya, he knocked down Ian Gary, didn't finish either of those guys. He clearly has power. He's clearly going up against the guy whose chin cannot handle the power at lightweight, let alone probably cannot handle the power at welterweight. Sometimes you see these guys going up and you're like, all right, not cutting weight. Maybe he'll handle the power a little bit better. Glenn moved up because of injuries. He didn't move up because he was having trouble making 145 pounds. And he proved he couldn't handle the power at 155. So what's it going to look like at 170? I think Song, not only to win by knockout at plus 145, I made that line plus 125. On the money line, I think is interesting at minus 175. However, he's not the highest volume guy. And there's a chance that Glenn just stays on the outside and kicks him a bunch. And if Song doesn't get the KO, I don't really want to lose the minus 175 in the money line because I bet a guy who's a low volume striker. That is what happens when you bet low volume strikers on the money line. They don't throw enough and they lose decisions. So I think his KO prop is the better bet, but his finish only line at minus 245, I made that line closer to minus 350. Glenn doesn't have much power. I know he knocked out Joaquin Silva a couple fights back. He does not have much power, does not have a crazy submission game. I don't really see him finishing this fight more than 10% of the time. 15% of the time, I think, is where I put his actual odds. And Song is like 45 to 50% if he does win the fight. So yeah, I made his finish only odds about minus 350, and you could bet that closer to minus 250. So I'll probably end up laying the juice on that rather than laying the juice on his money line. And I'll take some knockout prop as well.
All right. Excellent. There's your breakdown for UFC 305. We've got one more pod next week. I will not be here. It will be Sean and Billy. We have a special guest joining us next week. I don't know if we want to give that away just yet. I'm sure we'll
I don't know if we're allowed to, but
I don't know if we are either.
Joining us next week.
I like this, how we're walking the fine line of what we're allowed and not allowed to do. That's always fun. And
he's got good hair. I could say that.
Okay. Special guest joining the UFC betting preview on the Action Network podcast next week. So be on the lookout. Should be a lot of fun. I know Sean and Billy are looking forward to that. And a particular conversation. It's a guest. I mean, we've had Dan Stupp as a guest. Does that count as a guest? I mean, Dan's a contributor with us, right? We've had Brian Fonseca. No disrespect to those two, but yeah, we've got a
not great hair from those two, though.
I think this guy could beat the other two up. I'm pretty confident.
Oh, Billy, the dagger there. All right.
I mean, I've got a shaved head too. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying.
All right. Okay. So be on the lookout for a special guest joining the UFC betting preview next week. For Sean Zerillo and Billy Ward, be sure to follow these guys in the Action Network app. We did a long breakdown of the main event, but important if you can. I know it's a really, like you were saying, it's a tight window to try and bet live and follow guys in the app, but might be a good time to, if you haven't done so already, to follow those guys and try to have the app open and available while you're watching. I know it's a big ask, but yeah, main event, main card is on pay-per-view in Australia Saturday night. Very good. Thanks for tuning in to the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM, your UFC betting preview. Best of luck, and we'll talk to you again next week.